information about consuming mushrooms as healthy food. While there's a lot of different scientific names on this slide, Agaricus bispora is what we would call the white button mushroom or the pizza mushroom, which is the same as cremini, which is the same as portobello. They're just different growing types in medium. And there's a brown gill versus white gill. I do believe the brown gills might have a slightly different flavor. I don't really eat these. I have a blazei, which is Agaricus blazei. I suspect if you took away the U.S. white button mushroom consumption on salad bars, that one would pop up a little bit. I'd also suspect maitake might be a little bit higher. So Agaricus are really common gilled mushrooms that grow all over the place. Lentinula or lentinus idioides is shiitake. That is worldwide very common, a little bit more common in Asia, very common in Japan. Hang on a minute, pause, and I'm back. So shiitakes, distinct flavor, very popular. Now, the top of the next column is the oyster mushroom, Pleurotus ostreus, and that grows all over, and they're actually super easy to cultivate. So if you want to get a mushroom kit, that's probably the one you're going to be getting. I find those very tasty, and they also, because they grow everywhere, they do grow in the fall. So fungi for fall or fall for fungi. There's a summer oyster, a little bit browner. The golden oyster, those are kind of nice. So they're a little bit smaller. They do escape cultivation. And then there's a king oyster, which has got a bigger stalk. The nutrition facts are for the regular oyster mushrooms here. So I'm going to carry on into the next slide for that. So the second bullet point I have on this, distinct third food kingdom. This didn't come up in the intro, but fungi are its own kingdom, and it would make sense that they would be distinct. Fungi are in its own kingdom, even though we talk about them like plants, like vegetables. If you haven't heard this, fungi are genetically closer to mammals and humans than they are to plants. So you should really look at them as being closer to meat. They have a little bit different nutrition. They do have a couple of things that are found more in meat without the fat. And they could be like this little phrase that I found, food for the gods. They can be incredibly nourishing. This photograph is the white button mushroom, Agaricus bispora. So a few things here, low in fat, high in good fiber, low in sugar. Now, they can't be called high protein per most agency or government standards like the FDA. In specific, I was looking at the detail that was published per New Zealand government standards, agency that has published a lot for that, their research. It was really just slightly under what's recommended or what's allowed to be high protein. So good quality protein, almost high protein, low sodium, high potassium, good for a lot of people with cardiovascular disease. A really surprising source of biotin, and actually an amazing source of selenium, considering that selenium is so deficient in so many parts of the world. Very significant, although I wouldn't call it extremely high, for vitamin B6. That's really nice to see. Not super high in vitamin E, not super high in vitamin C. We'll talk about vitamin D at the end of this little segment. So we have a few specific compounds. The sterols are where I'll jump in for vitamin D. Most everything we're going to talk about for fungi have polysaccharides. So reasonably well studied in preclinical literature. These are high or moderate molecular weight polysaccharides. So sometimes when we're thinking about herbal and mycological medicine, we're really thinking about these high molecular weight polysaccharides stimulating and modulating the immune system. I'd like to think about them as well as feeding your flora, which could modulate your gut endocannabinoid system. I think that's a really nice, beautiful thing to think about. Beta glucans are the one kind of group that's been studied the most. Proteins, as mentioned before, the sterols will come back. Now, glycoproteins and phenolic compounds, there's some reference to that, antioxidant components. Triterpenoids are fairly specific in my own reading and just as a generalization to reishi, but many fungi do have antioxidant constituents. Some of that's phenolic compounds and some of that's a little bit different. So polysaccharides, a few chitin found in insects and crustaceans, trehalose, which actually used to be a really significant carbohydrate in prehistoric times. Most of the trehalose we get is from where it's been added to foods, and because it's been added to foods, including medicines and pharmacological foods in the hospital, it can contribute to dysbiosis. Now that's a loose association, but what we're really talking about are the glycans. So beta 1,3 linkage, so look at the graphic for this, or beta 1,6, and it's a D-glucan linkage, which is found more in the area of the sclerotium, closer to the ground. Roughly, I'm not the best at fungi anatomy, but that's sort of how it is. Not mycelium, which will be talked about later in these parts. The beta glucans are the best studied for malignancy and cancer support, mostly for support and to reduce side effects from chemotherapy, and then long-term associations in preclinical data. So feeding the flora, glycans, supporting the immune system, non-digestible, high molecular weight. So this list, there's a couple polysaccharides, is a group from shiitake, a couple that are listed from maitake, turkey tail. It's mostly the same one, polysaccharide K or PSK or crustin. And then, so these are all edible, reasonably edible. Turkey tail is not really edible. Maitake is my favorite out of these. Preclinical data, immune modulation and feeding the flora, and feeding the bifido, kind of thinking about it as a bifido effect. Bifidogenic effect. Now, I do think you could hashtag this, feed your flora, because it's so important to feed and support the immune system via the gut. Ergothioneine is a sulfur-containing compound in many mushrooms. I don't think they've studied all of them. I've seen several that have been reported in the literature. Significant antioxidant compared to glutathione. And in humans, it declines with age. So consuming mushrooms may help us. They did add this to elders. It didn't really do very much. It wasn't really the best designed, or at least especially with the best outcomes. But, it's something to really think about, that mushrooms are antioxidant as well as having immune beneficial effect. I'm not going to spend too much time on the lectins. So if you have followed the earlier information about the paleo diet, eating vegetables and legumes especially, legumes can be really high in lectins. They can bind a carbohydrate. They can interfere with cell signaling inside our cell. Now, some people with autoimmune sensitivity could have reactions to lectins. I've got some positive benefits here, the lectins in mushrooms. There's a number of great lectins. So elderberry has great lectins to make it an antiviral. So I hate putting lectins into the bad box, but it is something that, you have a family history of autoimmunity, personal history, let's just go light on the mushrooms and maybe do one at a time, especially if they're consuming them. Sterols, this is where we're going to end this segment. Ergosterol is a precursor to vitamin D2, ergocalciferol, so this is our vegetarian source for one of the biggest vitamin slash hormone slash supplements in the last 15 years or so. There is some information that the D2 does not work as beneficially as D3 in humans, but you can make more D2 in the mushrooms that you buy in the store just by putting them in the sunlight for a little bit. So if I put them outside, maybe it's going to take a few hours. If I have a great UV light at home, it might just take a few minutes. So something to really think about. You can occasionally see them being labeled as having UV light exposure, so being higher in vitamin D2. So this will conclude this section, part 2, mostly nutrition.